Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn, and today we're discussing a recent Supreme Court decision about when an internet provider must disclose the IP address of a user to police. The case is called R and Bekovets, and it began with an investigation into online fraud at a liquor store. Initially, during the investigation, the police requested that the store's payment processor, Moneris, give them the IP addresses associated with suspicious transactions. The police did not have a warrant, but the company gave the police the IP addresses anyway. The police then got a production order compelling the internet service providers of those IP addresses to disclose the subscriber information associated with them. If you follow, this essentially allowed the police to match the IP addresses of the fraudulent purchases with the names of a specific individual. That individual, the accused, was then convicted, but he argued that the police had violated his privacy rights by seeking the IP addresses from Moneris without a warrant. The Supreme Court agreed and held that IP addresses are protected on privacy grounds. Police require judicial approval, a warrant, before seeking the IP address. As a result, the conviction was quashed and the court ordered a new trial. Here today to discuss the case are two experts. Nadine Toddy is a lawyer with Borden Ladner Gervais, and Vibert Jack is the executive director of the BC Civil Liberties, litigation director with the BC Civil Liberties Association. Thank you both so much for joining me today. First, I don't want to get ahead of myself on this explanation of the case, and the question in the case is whether or not police need to get an IP address, a warrant before they get an IP address. But just to get to basics, Nadine, can you explain what an IP address exactly is and why a person may have a privacy interest in it?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Christine. So, an IP address is essentially a string of abstract, unique numbers that are assigned to a device participating in a computer network, and is typically assigned to an individual by an ISP, an internet service provider, and it's essential to access the internet itself and to send and receive data. So, to answer the second part of your question, privacy protections in Canada find their source in Section 8 of the Charter, which I'm sure we'll cover more in the next few minutes. And there are generally three types of interests: privacy interests, a personal privacy, which follows like bodily integrity and such, and territorial, which is more, we're placing limits on the right to intrude on another individual's environment, and informational privacy. So, of course, this case relates to informational privacy in relation to the disclosure of an IP address. And so, in determining whether someone has a privacy interest, we look at a set of factors, including whether the subject matter, what is the subject matter of the alleged search, the claimant's interest in the subject matter, whether the claimant's subjective expectation of privacy, whether the claimant has a subjective expectation of privacy, and whether that subjective expectation is objectively reasonable. And so, we look at all these factors, and if the conclusion is that the person has a reasonable expectation of privacy, in this case, for example, the IP address may reveal personal information. So it's not unreasonable for one to think that they may have a privacy interest in it. And so it's a highly contextual analysis, but it's important to note that not all information that an individual may wish to keep private necessarily benefits from Section 8 protection.
And Section 8 in the Charter is the protection against unreasonable search and seizure.
Exactly.
So, Vibert, is there anything you want to say there about why you might have an interest in a privacy interest in your IP address, or anything you want to add about the background of this case that I might have missed in my short summary there?
Um, yeah, so I think Nadine did a great job of covering it. I would just emphasize that due to the way the internet works, it is impossible to use the internet without an IP address. Everyone always has one, whether you're on your computer or your smartphone. And because it's a unique identifier, again, the internet service provider always can tie your internet activity to that IP address that you have to be using.
So, one of the things that really stood out to me is why we didn't have an interest in this before now. Nadine, only about 30 seconds. This is new, right? Why did we not have a privacy interest in IP addresses until now?
So, I mean, it's a great question. I think it's important to raise that In areas that are impacted by technology and AI, which privacy law is,
Hmm.
it's an ever evolving area of the law that has to continuously
Yeah,
adapt to the ubiquitous privacy risks that we constantly face. So
absolutely.
I think the outcome here
Let,
was
let's
really,
let's just quickly take a break and we'll be right back.
yeah.